Hello, bachcho. Let's see the question. So the question says, which of the following glucose transporters is insulin dependent? So out of the four given options, we need to identify the glucose transporter which does not depend upon the function of insulin. So the key concept in this question is to first understand GLUT and its types. So this is a difficult question. So let's begin by understanding this key concept. So firstly, GLUT stands for glucose transporters. Now the function of glucose transporters, as the name suggests, is to transport glucose molecules across cell membrane. Now the question arises, why do you need transporters for transporting glucose across the cell membrane? Now, glucose is a hydrophilic molecule. On the other hand, the cell membrane, which is composed of the lipid bilayer, that is the phospholipid bilayer, is hydrophobic in nature. Now, for the transport of a hydrophilic molecule across a hydrophobic cell membrane, it requires certain transporters, and therefore glucose transporters are the one that mediates the transport of glucose across the cell membrane. Now, depending upon the function of the glucose transporters are classified in the following groups. Now, there are 14 types of glucose transporters present in our body, but the four most important types of glucose transporters are as follows. So, the first one is GLUT1. Now, these transporters are present in the blood, that is the red blood cells. So, they help in the glucose uptake by the red blood cells. Also, these proteins are insulin independent. That is, they do not depend upon the concentration of insulin for the uptake of glucose by the red blood cells. Now, the second type of glucose transporter is GLUT2. Now, GLUT2 is present in the pancreas, the small intestine, and the liver. So they help in the uptake of glucose in the pancreatic or the small intestine or the liver cells. Also, they are insulin independent. Now, an important factor in case of GLUT2 is that GLUT2 have a very high Km value, which means that they have a very low affinity for glucose. Now, since glucose is formed in the small intestine by the digestion of the carbohydrates, so if the small intestine itself uptakes all the glucose, then there will be no glucose left for the rest of the body. So to prevent that, GLUT2 has a high Km value so that the affinity for glucose becomes less. So glucose uptake by the small intestine or the pancreas or the liver will only take place when the concentration of glucose is very high. So this is the function of GLUT2. Now the third type of glucose transporter is the GLUT3. GLUT3 is particularly present in the brain cells, in neurons, and in muscle cells. Now, they are also insulin independent. Now, GLUT3 has a very low Km value, which means that they have a very high affinity for glucose. Now, since brain cells, neurons, that is the central nervous system, and the muscular system both require a lot of energy for its functions to take place. Therefore, they require a lot of glucose, which is the source of energy for their functions. Therefore, it is only possible when there is a high uptake of glucose by these cells. Therefore, the Km value is low. So, the affinity for glucose is high. So, the GLUT3 can uptake glucose even when the glucose concentration is quite low. So, that is the function of GLUT3. Now, the fourth one is GLUT4. Now, GLUT4 is present in the heart cells, the skeletal muscles, and they are present in the adipose tissues or the adipose cells. Now, the most important factor of GLUT4 is that they are insulin dependent. Which means that they depend upon the concentration of insulin for the uptake of glucose by the heart cells or the skeletal muscle cells and the adipose cells. Now, when the affinity for glucose by GLUT4 is affected, that can cause diabetes mellitus, because in that case, the uptake of glucose by the muscle cells or the adipose cell is affected, resulting in the higher concentration of glucose in the blood, that is hyperglycemia. So, we can see that GLUT1, GLUT2 and GLUT3 are all insulin independent. Therefore, they will not be our answer. But GLUT4 is insulin dependent. Therefore, the glucose transporter, which is insulin dependent, will be GLUT4. So, our final answer is option 4, that is GLUT4, which is insulin dependent. Hope you understood it well. Best of luck.